the habits that we tend to have as human beings is people tend to want to tell you what you're doing wrong rather than catch you and reinforce what you're doing right or well. And I think one thing that I would offer all organisations that I work with is it's your choice as to what you focus on. And my advice would be to catch people doing things right and tell them.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Jenny Denier. She has her own company, the Woburn Management Group, and is here to discuss with us her expertise on high performance culture. Jenny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Georgina. So I've got quite an unusual background. I originally became a professional squash player. The great thing about squash is we play on glass courts and you can put a glass court anywhere. So I've been privileged enough to play in some amazing places, in front of the pyramids in Egypt, for example, in Grand Central Station. But when you're playing squash, you're literally you're in the same space as your opponent and you're in a glass box and you're trying to win. And so I got really interested in the psychology of performance to try and get better at winning at squash. And I got so interested, in fact, that I ended up, whilst I was playing, doing a PhD in sports psychology. So some around me were saying, this is complete madness. The very thing that you're trying to do, you're making your life harder. But my view was, why not? And this is to become the best that I could be. I felt like part of that was really understanding what it takes from a psychological, from an emotional point of view to be able to show up as myself and perform and do what it took on that particular day, despite the adversity of the situation. The other thing about the glass courts were that you could play, you could be on the harbour side in Hong Kong, for example, and it could be windy, it could be cold, or you could be, in Hurghada in Egypt on an island, and all of a sudden the court just gets filled with sand. And so from a psychological perspective, there are all these factors that are unexpected that you have to be able to deal with. So that's really the start of why I got interested in this. I got to top 8 in the world and I played for England. But I also had struggles with managing the lifestyle, being on my own for a lot of the time, and being around people who I was trying to beat, who were my friends and people that were the only people really that understood what I was going through, but at the same time trying to get an edge to beat them. So quite an unusual way to spend your time. And obviously I was intellectually interested. I'm doing the PhD. And then when I finished playing, I always thought, well, I'll work as a sports psychologist helping other athletes. But then I got an opportunity to join a management consultancy, and people who had helped me through the PhD had set up this management consultancy called Lane 4 Management Group and said, come on, why don't you come and join us? This will be something completely different. It will be an opportunity to challenge yourself and see whether actually you can transition some of your skills from high performance sport into working with people in businesses and organizations. So ironically, I've spent most of my career working in business rather than in sport, but applying some of the same principles of psychology and trying to help very senior leaders and their teams to be the best that they can be, create an environment in which, people love to come to work and create an environment in which people are highly motivated and highly confident.
So if I just reflect on what I've heard quickly. So Jenny, you are quite a lady, aren't you? You don't do anything by halves, playing squash for England, doing a PhD. I'm hearing how you've really embraced the opportunities that have come your way, whether it's playing squash in a sandstorm, and then taking your skills into the workplace, another massive change. And I'm just mindful of the tremendous resilience that you must possess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been times where I've taken that for granted, because as an elite sports person, on a daily basis, you're faced with another challenge, and so you get used to reframing threat as challenge, it becomes more automatic. And so I think maybe, that, and I know there's a lot more to resilience than that, but in terms of how you see, how I see situations, I think that's probably a habit that got ingrained early on that has been quite helpful in keeping me motivated, but also I think it is helpful when coaching others in helping them to see situations in a more positive light.
Well, I'm really curious, Jenny, about what we mean by high performance culture. And I imagine it incorporates some of that resilience that you've just been mentioning there.
So in my mind, a high performance culture is one in which there is huge amounts of support. So more support than you would imagine in any normal working environment. If, for example, if we were to go into British cycling right now, each of those athletes has a support team of 5 or 6 people around them to help them to win medals at the next Olympic Games. If you imagine, in a work situation, it's the opposite. So often I'm invited to work with senior leaders who, if they've got one person supporting them, they're lucky. And they generally feel like the size of the challenge is massive, and with very small amounts of support around them. So when I compare environments in organizational environments to sporting environments at the highest level, the biggest differentiator is the amount of support for high performance athletes. I'd also say that in a high performance culture, there has to be honesty and feedback. And so that, I think, also differentiates a high performance sporting environment from an organizational environment. In a sporting environment, athletes are used to getting feedback all the time, every day. And some of that feedback is not, it's quite brutal and quite tough. In a work environment, there's a lot less feedback. People don't like to and don't really know how to give feedback in a way that lands and builds confidence and motivation. And there's quite a lot of people avoiding giving any sort of feedback. So I would see that there's some of the things that are different. And obviously in a high performance sporting environment, in order to be able to give that kind of feedback, you have to have the ability to create some level of psychological safety. And sometimes when it goes wrong in high performance sport, it's because of that very reason, that there's been an inability to create psychological safety. There's been far too much threat injected, and that can be obviously the shadow side and quite damaging.
So I'm curious about the support system that was around you when you were playing squash for England. And I'm also really interested in actually, how do you do it well? Because it is really hard, isn't it? Providing critical feedback that empowers the person rather than wounds the person. And what's the exchange there between the individual and the person giving the feedback? Sorry, that's a lot of questions, Jenny.
So which one would you like me to answer first? The support.
The support when you were working in sports.
So for me personally, I started playing professionally in 1996, and in 1997, the World Class Lottery funded program came into. It was born in the UK, and UK sport started to fund high performance programs across the sports. And that was really a game changer in the level of support that was then being provided throughout sport in this country, and very much needed. So I played for England as a junior without any of that backup. And it was very amateur. It was going away with volunteer coaches and trying to compete against other teams who were really had much more professional setups. Post 1997 and into my senior career, we had huge benefit from the injection of a lot of money, more coaching support, physio support, psychology support, nutritional support. All of a sudden, the whole system became a lot more professional. So I think that for me, I benefited from that. I think where we are now, if you think back to 1992, I think we only had a handful of medalists at Olympic Games, and yet now we're sending teams to both Summer and Winter Games we're expecting them to be able to compete with the best in the world on the Olympic stage and win medals. And that really is, the direct result of that injection of funding and the professionalisation of sports across the board.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because I'm not in the sporting world at all, and I wasn't aware of all the people bringing in their input that really helps get that high level of performance. Now, the second point was around how you give criticism well and how you receive criticism.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a simple set of principles, yet in my experience of working with leaders and their teams and organisations more broadly, they're sort of principles that are just not understood. So in terms of feedback, usually people think that when you say to somebody, I need to give you some feedback, if I said that to you now, you will probably have a immediate visceral reaction to that. I guess the reason for that is because I've triggered your threat response by saying I'd like to give you some feedback, and immediately most people, when that's said to them, will think, my God, what have I done wrong? And they will start to feel like they're being judged. And obviously, once your fight and flight response has been triggered, it's not a very helpful and open state to be in to receive any useful feedback. So, I mean, I would avoid, the first thing is avoiding using that phrase full stop. The second thing is, and especially in my experience of working in organisations in this country and in sport in this country, is that people tend to want to offer what I would call developmental feedback a lot more often than what I call motivational feedback. So the habits that we tend to have as human beings is, and especially probably from being parented and being taught at schools and etc., people tend to want to tell you what you're doing wrong rather than catch you and reinforce what you're doing right or well. And I think one thing that I would offer all organisations that I work with is, it's your choice as to what you focus on. And my advice would be to catch people doing things right and tell them we often at Lane 4, we used to talk about a ratio of 5 to 1. And we used to ask people in organisations, what if we were to say the ratio is 5 to 1, which one of those is it? 5 times the amount of motivational feedback to every bit of developmental, or the other way around? And most people will say it's 5 times the amount of development if you want to drive performance. And actually, it's 5 times the amount of motivational feedback for every bit of developmental feedback if you want to drive performance. So you have to help people to understand what they're doing well and to feel okay about what they're doing, to be able to be open enough to take on board a bit of developmental feedback.
I love this. And what I love about it is you want to speak the truth. So if there is a developmental need, you don't want to pretend that that's not there. But there's what I'm hearing, or this is how I've interpreted it, so do correct me, is by offering the motivational, to me that speaks relationship.
That's
so
right.
If somebody comes in with, oh, you could do this better, that's what helps you grow, you blah, 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 you don't have the relationship. If someone's going, Jenny, that was an outstanding thing that you did just then. And, oh, Jenny, I really appreciated what you did there. And that you aced it. And we really value you in this team. You start to think like, be part of something and connect to it and value it a lot more, I think. So to then say, Jenny, I did notice that perhaps this bit could be dialed up a little bit or dialed down a little bit or whatever it is. What are your thoughts on that? Like opening up a conversation around that.
That's right.
You're doing it from a relational stance.
Completely
I love
agree. And for me, feedback is part of a coaching conversation. And the reason to give somebody some feedback is to help them to achieve what they want to achieve. And as part of the relationship, the coaching relationship, they're giving you permission to help them and you explore that together. And so that relationship is absolutely vital in order to be able to hear any useful feedback and to work with it.
I mean, in psychology, in our clinics, it's relationship is key. You can't do therapy with people if you don't have a good therapeutic relationship. So I would say, particularly where we work, where people have had quite poor early attachments and relationships, we have to spend a lot of time building the relationship before we can even start to think about what could you do differently. And I have to say, when you were talking about the psychological aspects of it, the sort of threat-based system, Georgina and I had a little chat before this about what performance culture meant. And I have to confess, it triggered a threat-based reaction in me, an enormous threat-based reaction. Whereas Georgina describe your response to it.
I find it exciting, the idea that you can galvanise your energy in the direction of something positive, a goal to achieve. Ruth was spinning and I understood what you were saying, Ruth, because she was talking about her experience of sales and being given performance charts and who's performing better, who's performing worse. And it's, oh, that sounds horrible. And it also makes an assumption that everything is in your control. Like if you want to sell something, you also need someone who wants to receive what you're selling. Oh dear. So yes, tell us about some of the misconceptions about the high performance culture.
Well, I think they're not misconceptions. So though the high levels of competition and huge amounts of risk involved in high performance sport, and I mean risks financially, risks to the ego, there's sort of a lot of threat all around. And without working with a psychologist, if you were just subjected to being in that environment without any mental skills, emotional regulation techniques, your nervous system would be in overdrive, and it would be very unpleasurable. Probably you would feel like you just didn't have the resources to cope with it, and it would be highly damaging. So I think that, yeah, the environment, some of these highly competitive environments are brutal on the nervous system. Hence the need to help people, athletes, parents, coaches, performance directors, really understand what is required to be able to cope and enjoy that, enjoy the ride, which is having done it personally, is like a very big challenge.
So are you looking at support in terms of managing disappointment, managing hostility from other people?
Yeah.
Yeah. And using those psychological skills and just managing the threat that our nervous system experiences. Okay. So when Ruth talked about those kind of the graphs of performances, is that something you use in a high performance culture?
It's inevitable within the sporting system in the UK right now, given the amount of funding that is being injected in across the board. So I guess it's like any business, if the funding body needs to see the return on investment. So therefore there is a lot of pressure. If each sport gets an amount of money from UK sport to deliver medals, then there's a lot of pressure for athletes operating in those sports to be able to win those medals. And so inevitably those that are administering it on behalf of the funding body want to put measures in place to make sure that they are getting the return. And
Yes.
that the athletes are really clear on what is expected of them in receipt of that funding. I mean, I remember getting a letter from the performance director directly to me, and the letter said, lottery funding is a privilege, not a right. And there are a number of things a number of expectations that are associated with it, and a list of what those expectations were. And I remember thinking, I mean, I was only, 21, 22, quite a thing to receive that written down in front of you. And so it's a choice as to whether or not you want to be part of that, and what if you do want to be part of that, why you want to be part of that. And I think a lot of good work has been done through the psychology profession, actually working in high performance sport, to help athletes and those working in governing bodies to understand the bigger picture here. And actually it's not about the medals, it's about inspiring the next generation of people to want to exercise, and to want to exercise through playing this particular sport, and to want to make friends through exercising and playing sport, and to want to be a healthy nation. And all of those bigger picture purpose purposes are things that we can buy into and feel inspired by. And I think if we can remind ourselves of that, it feels a lot less threatening and a lot more exciting and inspiring.
Yes, so staying focused on your big picture rather than we expect you to perform or this money's going, which is very much the threat system, isn't it?
That's right.
That's going to get activated there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see it in inexperienced coaches. So, I mean, I've worked in some sports at the highest level, and I remember working in basketball once and observing a coach in action, and in the heat of the moment, shouting, "Get the effing ball in the effing basket," is really not that helpful to the athlete who's obviously trying to get the ball in the basket. So to be a really effective leader and coach in that kind of environment, you really need to understand the threat system anxiety and how to help to, how to soak up anxiety for others to enable them to play as though they were the 5-year-old without any of this ridiculous pressure.
You reminded me of my previous job where I managed a team, and it was in the NHS, and they had key performance indicators and a lot of pressure. This is, taxpayers' money coming in to deliver these therapies. We need to see performance, we need to see outcomes, we need to see a target of recovery of people getting better. And so the management would come in with all this pressure of like number of people being seen, outcomes, statistics. I felt like I was a buffer between the institutional anxiety coming to try and get them to perform and what they needed. So I'd hear these messages and have to think about, okay, how do I distill, turn it into something palatable? My thought was, actually, if I can provide an environment where they feel secure and they're not in a threat state, because when we're in a threat state, the blood comes out of the thinking part of our brain, getting ready for fight or flight. So if I can help them feel secure and settled and not in a threat state, they're likely to deliver the best therapy versus me saying, come on, get those stats sorted.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspiring action as opposed to threatening the consequences of inaction, which, I mean, it creates two completely different climates. And which
I
one?
love
Which
that, inspiring action as opposed to what was the
threat of inaction?
The threat of inaction.
If
Yes.
you don't do this, then this is like you say, it's slowing people down because it's triggering the fight or flight response. They then can't think. They're then in overwhelm, and you're actually making it a lot. The performance is going to be a lot worse than if people are coming to work absolutely rocking and rolling, thinking this is. I love coming here. I love the attitude of this place. I get a buzz from it, and we're going to work together and we're going to achieve this together. We're going to collaborate. Those are the sorts of things where you're creating buzz and energy for action.
We were talking earlier about how you get that motivation might be really different for different people. Georgina and I were talking about how would we motivate ourselves to do some of the tasks we need to do for our business when they're sort of how do we do that? And we recognized that we were aiming. I picked up this little thing and I said, okay, this is the goal. And if you come at it from that angle, Georgina's motivated and she's like, yes, I get it. This is important. I want to go. Whereas for me, I'm like, I find that angle a bit stressful. Whereas if you come at it from this angle, for me, it's got to be what's the deep rooted meaning, but sort of, I've got to anchor it in that. And you're coming at it for the same angle, aiming for exactly the same product, exactly the same thing. But we are motivated so differently to get there. And understanding that language and those nuances, I think that must be a real challenge for business leaders. I mean, is that something that you get involved with, is thinking about how to pitch that when you've got a team of 10 and they're all motivated differently?
Absolutely. I think leadership communication is a really ongoing and evolving skill. If you're a leader in an organization, you're constantly working on how to communicate to land messages clearly and inspire action. So I think that's important. But one of the things that when I was reading your set of questions in advance of this conversation, one of them was, what are the couple of theories in psychology that really help you in your world? And I think in sports psychology, Ed Dietschy talks about intrinsic motivation. I think it's just an essential theory of motivation. for anyone who's working in an organisation to understand. And that is that we can be motivated intrinsically as well as extrinsically. Most organisations want to provide extrinsic reward and assume that if they pay people more, or if they promote people, or if they offer them material things, that they will perform to a higher level or better. Ed Dietry talks about really, for motivation to last and be sustained over a period of time, it needs to be intrinsic. So, what are the things that, how do we get at people's intrinsic motivation? And he talks about psychological needs theory, which underpins it. So, what are the psychological needs that people have? And they come into three things: A, B, C. A is autonomy. So people are generally motivated when they can make their own choices. And so autonomy support for a leader is really important, empowering people to be able to make their own choices and their own decisions and take responsibility for whatever it is that they're doing, is autonomy support. B is belonging. So people are motivated by being part of something bigger. So that may be it may be to do with the brand of the organisation. We exist to keep Britain healthy, for example. Might be I'm part of the people, the health workers that do that. That's a belonging piece. It might be as simple as I work for the NHS. Is a proud, that immediate feeling of pride. It's belonging.
Yes.
It might be that you come to work and you've got people who are like you're in a profession, and so you belong to that profession. You're a lawyer, or you're a doctor, or you're a nurse, or you're a teacher, whatever it is. That might provide belonging. But I think for a leader, considering how do you create belonging in this team is an important question. And the third one is C, is competence. So you will always get people in your team that are motivated by doing things well. So what are you doing as a leader to help those people that want to know that, they want the league table, they want to know that they can do it? And motivational feedback and any sort of feedback, but particularly motivational feedback, is helpful for competence people.
Oh, I think those are such important points. And I'm kind of seeing that being lived out by one of my friends who has a super big job, and she's desperately unhappy because the cultural shift has totally taken away the belonging, the nurturance, and they just keep giving her more money, which is very nice, but it's not addressing the problem. And actually what she wants is cohesiveness and connection at work. Let's face it, we spend a lot of time at work.
Okay.
Our workplaces have become the villages, the community that we inhabit. If we're not connecting in a meaningful way with the people around us, that affects our mental health, our well-being, and our performance. It really matters.
Yeah, I mean, it is I think it's a crucial part of executive coaching, actually, is helping. I do a lot of work with senior leaders and helping them to understand how to help create a culture in which people become motivated and confident. It's effectively a high performance culture, but it's a culture in which people become that. I think is and you have to therefore pay attention to people's individual needs, which is where we started this conversation, and provide things in the environment, in the climate, in your communication to support all of those needs.
Yes. So we've been kind of focusing on culture. I'm curious on mindsets. So individual mindset. So I quite like Carol Dweck's work on the growth versus fixed mindsets. Is that something that comes into high performance coaching?
Yes, very much so. It's easy to sort of say, are you a rock or a sponge? And we're all rocks and we're all sponges at different moments in time. I think the psychological safety is the prerequisite for being a sponge. So being able to be open to learning, to grow yourself, you can only do that with an amount of introspection, and you can only do that with somebody that you feel very safe with. And when you're in an
Yes.
environment that's judging you on ranking points and lots of other data points, it's really difficult to have that kind of open conversation.
Well, my learning from Harold Dweck is very much that in order to grow, you have to have permission to fail and find the learning in your failures. So I was having a conversation with my little girl last night. She was drawing a picture and she was going, but Mummy, I haven't done that bit right. So it's all ruined. And so we were actually, hang on a minute, focus on that which you're pleased with. That bit, you can correct that here. It's fine. Look at the whole. So kind of see your strengths, push through. Don't give up if you feel disappointed. Keep going. And I think we need a system around that does that with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's there are so many different environments, aren't there, that are judging us. And when you think about your 7-year-olds, the importance all the time of doing something well is it's sort of drilled into them, even at that age, that she's already learned to effectively look at something and critically evaluate it, and then make a judgment on whether it's any good or not. And she's only 7. And so how do we help kids? How do we help anyone to actually be able to see what they've done well? And it's that appreciation, isn't it, of, well, what are the things? Confidence comes from knowing that you can do things well. And if you're only paying attention to what you can't, what you're doing badly, how are you building that confidence? We often, in sports psychology with athletes, we often get them to develop a belief wall. Have you ever heard of that as a tool? So it's sort of an A4 sheet of paper that just looks like a wall. It's got these bricks all over it, and the idea is that you get the athlete to think about what are the things that are absolutely true about them, that are unrefutable and can't be pushed over, hence being concreted into the wall. And sometimes I'm with an athlete and they can't think of anything that they can put on their belief wall because they've been operating in an environment where they're just getting brutal feedback. And so they've got to the point where they don't think they can do anything. And so actually going back and even things like, well, you've passed some GCSEs, that's in the belief wall. You've been in a relationship for 4 years with the same person. That's something to be proud. Don't take that for granted. That's something to be proud of. What are the other things? And I can sit with people for over 2 hours and say to them, look, we're not going anywhere. We're going to sit here. I'm with you. I know that there's so many things in there. The page is not big enough, but until you can see for yourself that we can't move forward here, and it's a very difficult exercise. And it can take you into very deep conversations and conversations with people. But it's amazing how the thinking habits that aren't serving us get ingrained.
Yes, it's fascinating. So what I'm hearing is a high performance culture is one that's actually quite holistic. So particularly in conversations about sport, how are you looking after your body? How are you looking after your mind? But they are fundamentally nurturing and affirming, because it is from that position of nurturance and affirmation that you can then bring in those, do you know what, a little tweak here might make the difference. And people then can hear that and do that, as opposed to, oh, I'm no good, there's no point. Yeah. So there are lots of things that you almost need to be able to blot out in order to perform at a very high level. So blotting out that, do you know what? Yeah, but unless you perform, that money's not coming again. So crack on. If you focus on that, well, it's at the carrot versus the stick, isn't it? And for most of us, it's the carrot that
Well,
gets us going.
again, in sports psychology, I mean, focus is an aspect of mental toughness that I would work with an athlete around. And if you think about different types of goals, I mean, you will have come across this in the work that you do. You can focus on outcome all you like, winning, ranking points, and all of that. That's not necessarily going to help you in terms of your anxieties. You've got no control over, not a lot of control over that necessarily. And so your anxiety will be through the roof. You can focus on performance measures, which we've talked about, which again can be useful in, am I on track or not to achieving this outcome? And if I'm not on track, what are the things that I do need to work on? So from a logical brain point of view, can be quite helpful. But if you're going in to play a match and you're only focusing on, winning points in games, that's not, again, that helpful to you from an anxiety point of view. The process goals are the most important things. So the things that you feel like you're fully in control of. So how you carry yourself when you walk through the court door and shut the door, how you choose to respond or react in the knock up, like how you choose to hit the ball and where you choose to hit the ball are all things within your control. And so having some processes to focus on is probably the most helpful thing for an athlete during a match. And we always say, if you want to maintain motivation and confidence over time, you need all three types of goal. Outcome goals provide inspiration and motivation. I'm doing this because I want to play for England. I'm doing this because I want to, create the next generation of healthy people. I want to inspire them. That's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. That's the outcome goal. The performance measures, I know that I've worked out which tournaments I need to do well in. What I need and whether or not I'm on track physically because I'm measuring this, and this. But it's the process goals that you can hang on to, the things that you actually do when you're walking through the court door, when you're hitting that next ball, where you're putting the ball, how you're hitting it, your body language, your breathing, your breath work, how long you take between serve and return, those sorts of things.
That's fascinating. As someone who sort of gravitates towards the deep and meaningful sort of stuff, it's really helpful to also think about what are the micro behaviours. And it reminds me of this sort of habit stacking theory.
Right.
And kind of going, okay, so if you want to get good at this, do it again, do it again, do it again, and refine, or just do it with intention and focus. And I think me personally, I miss that sometimes. So it's fascinating to hear from you about actually you need them all to sort of glue together. You need to do those little repeating things as well as why am I doing this? What's my meaning and purpose? The sort of drive behind it.
And when you think about, your 7-year-old, how can you help the 7-year-old to develop good habits? And things like eating well, keeping hydrated, going to bed and getting a decent amount of sleep, using breath work to when you feel anxious and uneasy, and being able to take control in those moments yourself are incredibly powerful things for kids to get into the habit of, to help children to realize how unhelpful it is when somebody is saying to them, you just need to revise and you just need to do well in this exam and there's so much pressure out there for them to help them to be able to just let that go. They can't control it. So let that go and focus on what they can control in the moment and developing some of those habits and skills. I think is really empowering, and where we need to be with some of these, the next generation.
That is really helpful, thank you. And actually, it's very hard one. So I was getting good nutritious food into my children, that is no easy task. And
Yeah.
they're always stealing snacks from the treat cupboard. I'm like, I've got to put a lock on this. This is...
My mum had to put a lock on our treat cupboard when I was little, so you won't be the first one, Georgina.
It's something about the persistence, isn't it? Because actually it's draining when you're extremely fatigued, when you're managing lots of different things. Actually, what are the little things that you focus on and hold on to that actually are crucial?
I also think that, I mean, the other when you're asking me about the psychology, the other psychology pieces that I think have served me well, I think that the human potential movement and the idea of unconditional positive regard is something that I think, I mean, it's fundamental to coaching people. But even, I mean, I coach loads of kids at squash, and I think I go on there and I'm looking for their genius. I think every child is full of genius, and I think that's come from the human potential movement, the idea that everybody's brilliant, and it's about unleashing that brilliance within the child, the person. And obviously, the older somebody is, the more is in the way. If you think performance equals potential minus interference, then there's a lot more interference when you've got to 40, 45, 50, because of the years of all of this stuff that you've been told is sort of in the way of you getting to, well, what is motivating me? What do I love doing? What am I passionate about? Who am I? All of that stuff is clouded by the layers of stuff that's been sent to people. Whereas when you've got your 7-year-olds and they're just playing a musical instrument and driving you mad with it, or they're singing, or they're copying someone else, they don't have that. They're uninhibited. If you can catch kids at that moment and really help them really understand that that's genius, and feed that back to them, and nurture that genius in them, then it's amazing what, I mean, you must have had this in your life as well, but the number of human beings that have amazed me with how they've become, how they've evolved, and what they've achieved is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we work with severe enduring mental health, and so some of the backstories of the people that we meet are absolutely heartbreaking. And they come into therapy because things are not working. So they're coming in because they're, I don't know, trapped by an OCD ritual, or chronically depressed and unable to sort of get out of those cycles, or the anxiety, whatever it is. And unpacking that, you do focus on all the stuff that is difficult and not working. But there are often times when I meet people and I think, wow, in spite of all of that stuff going on, you still managed to have a best friend who you stayed friends with. And so you kind of focus, that's a brick in your wall. You put that in your wall. I love this brick. That will be coming into my therapy sessions now. I think I really like that. That is a brick in your wall. Nobody can take that from you. You've maintained that friendship across your lifespan, or whatever it is, in spite of the adversity. Because even if we have like lots of input and encouragement and so on, we can still be a bit fragile and wobbly about life. So yeah, I really like that, looking at the full potential.
Yeah, I'm sure there's another conversation here about how, sharing, where we could share all of what we do and look at what where the crossover might be, and what we might be able to steal from each other that might be helpful in various situations.
Another question that we have is, so we look at psychologically what helps, and you've given us like some fantastic insights into what's inspired you from the world of psychology. But what about the what else, the stuff that sits outside psychology, outside the sporting arena or the workplace? What do you think sort of can feed into good mental health?
I think the things probably that I've already mentioned. I talk about sort of the four pillars of the hydration, the nutrition, the sleep, and the exercise, which are sort of, to me, fundamental things that lead to health. I mean, obviously, an athlete needs to really pay attention to that, because that is your foundation to anything else that you're doing. And if you're, for example, not able to sleep properly, your recovery is hindered, and so you're not able to get those minutiae, those 1%ers the next day in your training, because your sleep's been bad. Your sleep's obviously impacted by how much you're drinking and what you're drinking and when you're drinking it, and what you're eating and when you're eating it, and how much of certain foods you're eating, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think those for me are the things that that people, if you follow, if you've got good habits in those areas, whatever you're doing in life, you feel more able to deal with. If you've had a good night's sleep, whatever comes at you that day, you feel better equipped and ready to deal with. If you haven't, and you've not eaten properly, you're less able to handle adversity and pressure in however it comes.
And this is where I think Georgina is phenomenal, okay? Because she has a little boy who sometimes wakes up at 2 a.m, has habits of waking up at 2 a.m. and keeping her awake. And then she comes into work looking tired, but holding conversations as if she's had a full night's sleep. And I'm like, wow. How do you do that, Georgina? I don't know.
To be honest, I don't know. And I'm sure, God willing, one day it will settle, and then I will be able to ask myself that question.
But yes, so I think there's something about how we look after, you're talking about how we look after our body, like our bodies are a temple, if you like, and nutrition, sleep, rest, exercise, how we care for it. And I guess, like, joking aside about Georgina's situation, it's like being able to do the best you can within your context. So Georgina can't not have her little boy waking her up because he's awake and wakes her up. And so what can you do within that context to dial the other ones up or down? Or
Saying here very much fits into elements of our care and grow model, Ruth. So we spoke about connection today, and actually how important that is for psychological safety, for well-being, for performance. So that's our very first letter of our care and grow, connection. And we're talking also about respecting our body. If we're looking after our body, if we're getting the right amount of sleep, nutrients, etc., we're much more likely to function at a higher level. We're much more likely to experience good mental health.
Yeah, so I've got this little poster here, care, connect, acts of kindness, respect your body. So that's the bit that you're sort of talking about there.
We've also got a bit of R for reflect in our grow, haven't we? We've actually been talking about mindsets here, and actually how we talk to ourselves about the hostility that the world can demonstrate to us very freely, particularly now we've got all this social media. People don't really have filters on what they say. Ruth and I, we had a troll. I was quite excited that someone had commented, Jenny, quite honestly. But it's like, oh, and actually there was a buffer, with it being the two of us. And it's like, okay, you know what? When you're putting your stuff out there, or yourself out there, so people aren't always going to be kind.
I think the world that we're living in is got so many triggers for the the nervous system. It's untrue, and therefore, like you say, these habits, even if they're things that you wouldn't even call a habit, but they are habits, thinking habits. Your self-talk. I think is just critical to being able to cope with it all. Literally, you open your phone, and I'm horrified for my kids because I open the phone, and some of the headlines are just so ridiculous. They're so designed to trigger crooked thinking, overgeneralizing, black and white thinking, scaremongering times 1,000. They're all things, aren't they, that you just, if you took them at face value as though that was real, your nervous system would be on overdrive, and you've only been up for half an hour. So I think, and a lot of our kids, many of our kids are spending a lot of time on these devices with all of that being fed in consistently. So I think as psychologists, we do have to help people and dial up you don't have to, that's not real.
I think what you're saying there is, what are we listening to, and does it nurture us? And let's tune into that which nurtures and tune out of that which attacks. So Jenny, I wanted to have a think about this in relation to neurodivergence, because I think fundamentally what I've heard you say about a high performance culture is that it is kind. And going back to our model, Ruth, acts of kindness, it is that I think often frees people to utilise their God-given talents and skills, if you like, and freely express them. So I think we're talking about just adapting to all the individuals in front of us. And I think when it comes to neurodivergence, it's just sometimes about finding out what little adaptation might make a difference to them. So with Ruth, for example, you wouldn't ever bring out that spreadsheet of performance. That would be, I want nothing to do with this anymore. And so when she was talking earlier about you brought out your little object, she was talking about kind of meaning making, and if we can make meaning out of something, we can engage with the task more easily. Now, that little object was representing social media.
For us.
So Ruth is like, no, I don't think we really need to do social media. I don't like social media. I'm like, I think it's how we're communicating, Ruth. I don't think it's something you can kind of not do now, because like, if we're creating a resource, we might want people to know about it. No, not putting that out.
She's over dramatising.
Not much, Jenny. But the question is, and this is what we were saying, actually, how do I make this task that I honestly don't like, but is necessary to my role, how do I make it meaningful? And I think across the board, that is something that we all wrestle with to one degree or another.
Yeah, I think in the high performance environment, I'm coming at supporting athletes in a very individualized way. So if those athletes that are neurodivergent were in a rigid office building, and were having to, they were adhering to institutional life, as it were, it would be a lot more difficult for them to be at their best, because of the nature of the fact that they are running their own business in this case, squash player. That makes it slightly more comfortable for them to do it in a way that they want to do it. And my job is to challenge it where I can, if required, but also to work with them to find the best way for them to be the best they can be. So, and an example might be, I've got one athlete who just won't write anything down. So not even on the, so everything, all of the sessions that he's doing are in his head, not in his phone or written down in any way. So
does it stay in his head? Because that would work for me. It would be gone.
Yeah, I mean, he very rarely misses sessions, and not that I've not known him miss sessions, but obviously working with his coach, it's been a point of frustration, and because his coach would see that as being highly unprofessional.
Okay, but it's actually, he does have a brain that enables him to store that information, and the adaptation is to go with that rather than go to war with him about it and make assumptions about what it means.
Yeah, so we're moving forward together, I'd say, me supporting him. I'm not going to say, well, you need to write stuff down, because there's going to be a point where you just can't take in any more. Surely can't take in any more information. I don't think that approach would be helpful. So I'm trying to just be there and let him discover for himself what he needs to do, because that's where the motivation is going to come from, not from somebody else saying you need to do this. He doesn't need to. He needs to, understand himself and work within in a way that he's comfortable with.
Jenny, this has been absolutely fascinating, and we've covered a lot. And so, shall we try and summarise, Ruth? We talked about your journey into high performance culture being birthed by being within one and learning to master it, being playing squash for England, and how you've gone on to share those skills with people in the workplace. And I've really enjoyed our reflections on actually creating a culture, and this goes way beyond the workplace. We've talked about children, communities, families. Actually, if we can create a culture of safety where we recognise one another's strengths before we point out each other's weaknesses, and if we make adaptations, so come to understand the individual in front of us, we can help to create a culture of high performance much more globally. So I've found it fascinating. I don't know about you, Ruth. And actually, if we rewind to our conversation before we met you, Jenny, I think we were making some assumptions about what it means. And I think actually it's so, in terms of what we represent at Minds Thrive, it very much we would definitely promote the culture that you are aspiring to. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to say on that, I think a healthy high performance culture is what you've just described, and the watch out all the time in high performance is when it becomes too much of a good thing. and it can slip into unhealthy. And as you described earlier, there are many things around high performance that trigger threat. And therefore, with leaders, and if you've got leaders and coaches who don't understand anxiety and how to help people to thrive, then it can become very damaging.
Mm.
So there is, I think where I'm at with it is it's that it can be highly rewarding if we can get systems to leaders in those systems to understand healthy high performance.
Yes, and for me, healthy high performance, I just putting that word at the beginning, healthy. what I've learned from today is actually it's way more aligned with sort of my values and how I would like than what my assumption was about drive, stats, performance. It's much more loving and kind and holding. And so there's truth there, but the truth sits within a safe, warm, nurturing environment that is for you, not against you.
And I think just to summarise, it's development. You talk about relationship, but the development is part of that nurturing relationship. And so for me, development sits at the heart of any high performance, healthy high performance environment. If you don't have people who understand development and developmental psychology, then that is when, if there's an absence of that, that is when it purely measuring and cutthroat, brutal feedback and performance without development.
Thank you.